In this video, we're going to talk about blood. An important part of your circulatory system is your blood, and blood is made up of blood cells. So here are red blood cells. There are other blood cells, though. We have white blood cells, obviously, important in immunity, and platelets, which are involved in clotting. But actually, most of your blood is not cells. They wouldn't be able to flow very well if it was all cells. Most of it is plasma. So you can see 55% of your blood is actually this yellowish fluid called plasma. Now, plasma is not just water. It's not just a sort of inert fluid. It's got a lot of important nutrients that your body needs, that needs to circulate around your body. So obviously there's a lot of water in there. And water, is, of course, we said, is a really good solvent. It dissolves a lot of stuff, sugars and salts and amino acids and things. But within there are the salts that your body needs. So sodium and potassium, which are important in the sodium, potassium in the nervous system. Calcium for your bones, magnesium, chloride, other important electrolytes, which help maintain osmotic balance and provide buffers and all of that. Also, you have important proteins in your blood. One is called fibrinogen, which is going to convert into a protein called fibrin when you get cuts. And that fibrin forms a sticky web that allows your body to clot. And that's part of the clotting factor. Other important proteins are called antibodies. These are what attack foreign things and bacteria and viruses that make you sick. Antibodies help fight them, so they're an important part of your immune system. Other substances in the blood, obviously nutrients like glucose, sugars, fatty acids, vitamins, all those things that you just digested that are now circulated into your blood to provide energy for cells. Other particles, respiratory gases, carbon dioxide and oxygen, and then hormones, of course, have to circulate through your blood. When we look at the cells in your blood, so 45% of your blood is cellular elements, and the reason we say cellular elements and not just cells is platelets technically aren't full cells. They are cells that have broken up into small pieces, so we call them cellular elements. Red blood cells and white blood cells are obviously cells. The fancy term for red blood cells is erythrocytes, but we'll just call them red blood cells, and they're the majority of the cells in your blood, so 5 to 6 million per cubic millimeter of blood, and their primary role is to transport oxygen, and they also play a role in transporting carbon dioxide. So they transport oxygen and help with carbon dioxide. White blood cells don't transport oxygen. They don't play a role in that. They're involved in your immune system, right? Those white blood cells, when we watched the video on the salmonella and the guy's white blood cells that went around and defeated the salmonella infection. So they keep us healthy and fight infection. Because that's a smaller role, obviously there's not as many white blood cells in our blood as there are red blood cells. We obviously need a lot more red blood cells to deliver oxygen constantly to our muscles and brain and all of our organs. And then that last component of our blood cells are the platelets. Again, these are cells that have kind of broken up into these smaller units, and platelets are important because what they do is when we ever get a cut or a laceration, they sense that damaged connective tissue and they get very sticky, and then as they get sticky, they stick together and they stick to cells, and that helps to form the initial clot. And the sticky platelets also then signify a clotting response in this protein fibrinogen, and it forms this sticky web that helps with that clotting response. So platelets are basically involved in allowing our blood to clot. So those, again, are the three cellular elements, and they all come, remember, from our bone marrow. So all cells, red blood cells, or all blood cells are produced in our bone marrow, and they're what we call pluripotent. Pluri means many, potent is to be able to do something, to be potent. So pluripotent means they can turn into any type of blood cell. So these stem cells in your bones can turn into B and T cells. Those are two types of white blood cells. They can also turn into those macrophages that we saw in the video, or other white blood cells. These are all other types of white blood cells. And they can also turn into red blood cells, erythrocytes, or platelets, break up into those cellular components we call platelets for blood clotting. So from the bone marrow, these bone marrow cells can turn into all the different cells in our blood. Now the clotting response, this is an important role that, that platelets play. So you can see whenever we get damage to the protein fibers that surround our blood vessels, the platelets will actually sense that. They will sense that there's a tear and that these fibers are not fully in place. And that will chemically change them to become sticky, and they'll form what's called a platelet plug. And that platelet plug will kind of form an initial plug to clot the blood vessel and prevent blood from leaking out too much. Okay, but that platelet plug, that stickiness, those proteins, chemical signals also then activate the fibrinogen, this protein in our blood, which is usually dissolved in the blood and is really doing nothing at all. But that chemical by platelets will stimulate the fibrinogen to turn into an insoluble, sticky, kind of like spider web fiber. And then that fibrinogen turns into fibrin, and it's going to form this sticky mesh, which really helps to seal that clot. And that's what, if you have hemophilia, you lack the proteins that allow fibrin to form from fibrinogen. And so you do not get this clotting response, and your blood doesn't clot. So that's kind of the series. There's a series of proteins, one converts into another, but ultimately fibrin is made out of fibrinogen, and that fibrin initiates the clotting response in there. It's initiated by platelets, and this fibrin protein plays an important role allowing our blood to clot. Okay. Sometimes we have a problem when we have clots in our arteries that are actually plaques. These are actually unhealthy cholesterol plaques that are made up of this low-density lipoprotein. So they're actually a sort of fat protein complex, and they basically call what we call hardening of the arteries. So if you eat an unhealthy diet, a lot of trans fats, a lot of high-fat triglycerides in your diet, you can actually develop these hardening of the arteries where you get these low-density lipoproteins forming. And they're going to clot up the arteries and narrow them. And when they narrow them, blood can't flow. And if this happens to your heart, blood can't flow to your heart. And that's what leads to heart attacks. These clogged arteries can be very dangerous and lead to heart disease and many other illnesses. So it's important to eat a healthy diet and exercise, and that helps keep your arteries free from these plaques made of these low-density lipoproteins. Sometimes we call it just cholesterol, and that's why we get our cholesterol checked. And when they check your cholesterol, they look at your low-density lipoproteins and then your high-density. These are healthier lipoproteins that your body can metabolize and get rid of. So we want to, again, by exercise and diet, keep our cholesterol levels low and keep our arteries clear and opened and not narrowed and hardened. So this is a basic overview of blood and blood transport in the body.